We're excited about this interview here and this segment that we're going to do because Pride of Detroit, they do great work on the journalism side. As people, fans of the show know, I follow them, and they have a lot of great writers that are on my Sports Intel show often, and they'll also be moving over to Extra Points here. And Jeremy Reisman is one of the guys that leads it all, but he does a great job with the Movember campaign, raising a lot of funds over the years here. So we want to talk to him and shed light on that great campaign that he's running, and also talk to him about, we've got to talk to him about a couple things on that side of things, because I didn't hear about how the punishments went last year. I want to get a preview of those, and we have to, talk a little bit of football in the midst of this, so Jeremy, welcome to the show, and it's National Nachos Day. So I'm curious what your favorite football snack is when you're covering the game, but maybe you're having it in the press box there.
Yeah, well, first of all, I appreciate the kind words, and thanks for having me on. I would say just like on a day, maybe the Lions are playing on Monday night, or maybe it's their bye week. I'm like a pizza and wings guy. Like, just give me a bunch of pizza, a bunch of wings, and I'm happy for an afternoon to sit in front and watch Red Zone for 9 hours if I can.
Nice. Yeah, Red Zone is great. I like Red Zone with if I'm not watching the Lions game, because if it's the Lions game, it's one game on. Right. If the Lions aren't in that window, then it's Red Zone in the quad box, which is just pure chaos. You don't take anything in. It's like snorting football. It's like, hey, that was great, but now what happened in any of the games? I don't remember, but there was a lot of football.
Yes, it gives me AD. I don't know if I have ADD, but that definitely gives me ADD when I'm just watching multiple screens and Red Zone and quad box and all that stuff.
Exactly. I think I have a pretty good attention span, but it's like once you start to focus, if you're focusing too much, you're in trouble with the quad box here. But I want to talk about the Movember campaign for sure, like I highlighted. But we'll get some Lions coverage in first. I'm curious what you thought, because obviously the big discussion, and I saw some of your interactions on X with fans and fan reactions. Obviously, the big topic right now is that the Lions kind of stood pat at the trade deadline. I thought you made one of the best points, because I was kind of on board with that in general, because they do have some returns coming. You kind of highlighted some of this in some of your writing, but a lot of the top teams stood pat, and that was one of your points that you made. But I'm curious how you viewed the trade deadline, if you heard anything, if you were wanting them to do anything, or what your take was as the trade deadline passed with no moves here from Brad Holmes.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a part of me that thought they should have gone out and tried to get an offensive lineman, probably a guard, considering you lost Christian Mahogany for at least a month, maybe a month and a half here with some fractured bone in his leg. We never really got full clarification on that. Because, at the heart of this Detroit Lions team is their offensive line. It's, you don't have a mobile quarterback. You have a pocket passer, so you need to have him protected as much as possible. We know how much they love the run game. They run the ball pretty much more than anyone else, particularly on early downs. So they need to make sure that's going. And obviously they've had some struggles on the offensive line, and this almost felt like an opportunity where, you hate to lose Christian Mahogany, but at the same time, maybe this is an opportunity to get a player that could be an improvement for him in the short term. But there's so many complications that come at the trade deadline that you never hear about. And I think part of the reason I pointed out that so many contenders didn't make a trade, like, you look at the Green Bay Packers. Yes, they made the monumental trade at the beginning of the season, but they just lost Tucker Kraft, a huge part of their offense. And so you would expect maybe they go out and get a good tight end, a guy that can compete. But just because there's demand doesn't mean there's a supply, right? Just because the Lions want a guard doesn't mean there's a team willing to give up a starting guard or a guard that they view as an improvement over some of the veterans that they have on their squad anyways, in reserves or on their practice squad. So I think it's easy to get all excited about the huge trades that are out there. It's easy to want your team to just get a little bit better to make that final push to make a Super Bowl here. But it's always easier said than done. And with the Lions, I do think they have guys they trust in that building that they think are going to step in and kind of make it a seamless transition. And on top of that, the Lions just don't have a ton of resources either, right? They can't take on a big salary because of all the guys they've signed and re-signed, and they don't have a ton of draft capital. They traded away next year's third already, and I think they want to hold on to anything above that. So it was just kind of a full group of reasons why they didn't do it, even though I did think it was something that maybe they should consider.
I've had this discussion with other folks, but we need Brad to stop trading the third round picks, because then he always wants to get into the third round and then we don't have any. So that's not going to work well for him in the future. So hopefully he can stock that up. But no, I think it's a good point. I mean, we've seen this now develop with the defensive backfield a little bit. They got down to a lot of names that a lot of fans wouldn't even recognize, especially at the beginning of the season. And they had the Legion of Whom, which I don't know who thought of that, but that was brilliant. I liked that. I don't know if that was you guys, but I loved that nickname.
Nope, I wish.
Yeah, that was a good one. But they filled in nicely, and even though names like Stephon Gilmore and others were on the market, the Lions opted for their internal guys that they had some experience with. Yeah, they picked up a couple practice squad guys or guys that were out there. I think they're trying to do the same thing with this offensive line solution. They've got guys in the mix like Awashika, who we saw, Cologne, I think they have some belief in, and I think they're going to get some of these practice squad guys elevated, and it'll be interesting to see how they play, because the defensive backs acquitted themselves well in their roles in the last couple games, and now we'll see how these offensive linemen do. But it's easy, like you said, to say, okay, we want to go out and get this guy and that guy, but they're not always a good culture fit. They're not always a good fit as far as value that you use to acquire them and value that you pay them. And so, I mean, the Smith trade was all right last year, but it didn't necessarily work out, and that was a more aggressive move. And I think they're still in the hunt. I think they're still in the top 5 in most of the books to get to the Super Bowl, win the Super Bowl. They're still up there. And I think holding pat isn't necessarily a bad strategy, because, as you pointed out, there were a lot of other teams that did that.
Yeah, and especially when you're talking about the offensive line in particular, right? Like, that whole position requires so much chemistry that I think it makes sense for the Lions to be like, you know what, we trust a guy like Coyote Awashika, who has played next to Taylor Decker several times already in his career, rather than bringing in a new guy that's not going to know the playbook, not going to know how to, communicate maybe non-verbally with the guy to his left and the guy to his right. I think offensive line, you see it out there a lot. There aren't a lot of offensive line trades out there because it's going to require a few weeks, maybe a month, for him to get that sort of chemistry with the people next to him. And that's if it ever happens, right? You never even know if it's going to happen. And one of my colleagues made this point, and I think it was a really salient point. There was one offensive line trade this trade deadline. Trevor Penning went to the Chargers. Now, the Chargers lost their left tackle, their right tackle, and their backup tackle. And Trevor Penning was the best that they could do, which was, one of those late round swap guys. Trevor Penning is a guy who couldn't cut it at left tackle, couldn't cut it at right tackle with the Saints. He was playing left guard for them this year because he had fallen out of favor at tackle. And so that is the kind of trade that a Chargers team that was far more desperate than the Lions could muster. And I think that kind of just gives you a tale of what was probably out there for anyone looking for an offensive lineman.
Exactly. I think it's easy to say, because I like to say the fans like the fantasy book this kind of stuff. They take it's money that's not theirs and resources that's not theirs, and then try to play with it like they're doing fantasy, and it's just not it's not the same. And I think we, at this point, have to give some level of trust to Holmes and Campbell to turn what they have in-house through the culture, through Holmes' ability to draft and identify talent, and both of their staffs. The idea that might turn into something with these different layers, with the linemen, with the defensive backs like we're talking about, all of that should we should give them a little grace there. So I'm curious. We got to take a quick break, but I want to talk about the press conferences, because you talked about there being a little bit different mood with the coordinators in your writing today. So I want to talk about what you saw there, and then of course talk about the Movember campaign. So we'll be back with Jeremy Reisman in just a minute. Stick with us. You're listening to Shane Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Jeremy Reisman of Pride of Detroit, talking some Lions, and we're going to talk about the Movember campaign. But I'm curious because obviously people weren't real happy with the game from last week, but I always try to have a more positive leaning to things, and one of the things is the fact that they really played objectively kind of one of their worst games, but they got close at the end, and a lot of things weren't clicking after the bye week. But then I saw your writing today, Jeremy, about kind of the coordinators being in a different mood. So I'm curious kind of how you took that in and what you saw, because obviously the coaches aren't going to be happy after a performance like that. But I'm curious about kind of your take on the mood in the building and in the meetings after that.
Yeah, it was just a little bit odd because, we typically get the coordinators back to back on Thursdays, and that's how it was again today. But just kind of hearing them back to back, it was odd that they, sometimes it's just the questions that they're asked, and so I don't want to read too much into it, but each of them kind of, and I don't want to say threw someone under the bus, but held someone accountable. We start out with Dave Phipp, and he talks about how it was Jake Bates' fault that the kick was low. And, that's a factual statement, and I don't think he's trying to be insulting to Jake Bates, but he's saying publicly, yeah, it was that guy's fault. And then we get to Kelvin Shepard next, and we're praising Terrion Arnold a little bit for how much his coverage has gotten better, but he's also then but his run defense was unacceptable. And then we get to John Morton, who I think a lot of people were anticipating hearing from, and, we're kind of giving him a lot of outs for taking a little bit of responsibility for what happened against the Vikings. And he's pretty much just talking about the protection. The protection needs to be better. It wasn't communications. It wasn't scheme. It wasn't, we failed to ID what they were doing. It was just losing our one-on-ones. It was just, the offensive line, more or less. He's not saying that outright, but he's saying we just need to be better at winning our one-on-ones. And that last one is really particularly interesting to me because it's actually not what we're hearing from the offensive linemen themselves. Talked to Taylor Decker today, and he's like, it's not like we're getting run over there. It's not like we're getting beat up there. It's miscommunication. It's all the things that John Morton said it wasn't. And so I don't know. This was the first time where I'm like, I'm not sure what's happening here with these coaches. It seems like there's a little bit of disconnect, and that's not something I've ever really sensed from this regime at any point. And I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus here themselves, but it just was a little bit jarring today in a way that I don't know if this was the coaches maybe taking an opportunity to light a fire under the players. Maybe there's just not a good communication between the coaches and the players in terms of what they want to be out there in the media. I don't know. It was just a little bit of a strange day at Allen Park today. And, I'm still kind of digesting what I think it means.
I can see why, because that was when I was reading your coverage of it. That was, I think, the most unusual thing for me too. That Morton kind of went a different direction than we're used to the coaches going, and we're used to very heavy accountability from Dan Campbell. Right. He takes so much accountability, way more than maybe some would say he should, but I like the leadership element of that. I like that he sets that tone, and as the leader of the team, he says, hey, this all comes back to me. And I'm not saying that Morton was pushing that off, or I'm not insinuating anything with that. It's just a slightly different approach that when you compare it to the head coach makes it seem like it doesn't necessarily fit, like you said, the pretty staunch culture that we've been used to in the Campbell-Holmes era. Right, exactly. That's exactly it. And don't get me wrong, part of the culture in Detroit is also brutal honesty. The players actually mention that all the time as something they do appreciate about this regime, and I'm sure that includes Dan behind the scenes, and Brad Holmes too, where they're just like, hey, you're not doing this right, so you're getting benched.
they're going to be upfront and honest with their players about that sort of stuff, rather than let that sort of stuff simmer or just do something. Like they communicate in that sort of way. But usually that sort of the culture is something we only know exists behind the scenes. We hear about it, but we never really see it. And so again, like that's where the shift is a little bit, where it's like, okay, maybe they are using this kind of brutal honesty strategy, but they're doing it public facing, which is new, which is different. And it's not completely new. Like every now and then Dan will be like, he knows how to be honest about his players in a way that's usually protective of their ego or protective of whatever, in a way that doesn't sound too insulting. And I don't want to put it out there that, Morton was being insulting or any of these other guys were being insulting either. It's just a little bit more blunt than we're used to seeing from the public.
I'm curious to see how they're going to respond here. They've got a Washington team that isn't full strength. It's much further away from full strength, really, than the Lions are, even though they're dealing with their own injury issues. So it'll be interesting to follow that, and Pride of Detroit will be one of your best sources to do that. But I want to make sure to highlight the Movember campaign here a bit, Jeremy, because there's a lot of layers to it this year. One of the most fun things of last year was following the different incentives. So I'm curious what happened. I do think I saw a video. I can't remember all the things from last year. There was the shaving of the head, which we didn't get to. Thankfully for you, there, yes. and then there was a fish one. I think that was at the extreme end. But then I believe that Eric Schlitt's wife was going to take over your dating profile. Did that happen? And if so, how did that go?
It did happen. She was a little aghast at some of the pictures and choices that I made. So I think we overall got an improvement from the dating profile via Eric's wife. The biggest one that we reached last year after raising over $50,000 was I had to get a tattoo, which I had never gotten before. So I got a tattoo on my left bicep here of the Pride of Detroit logo with a little Movember mustache. But yeah, every year we do this charity drive over at Pride of Detroit where we're trying to raise money for a specific charity. Last year and this year, it's the University of Michigan Rogel Cancer Center. And yeah, we do fun stuff all month. We do raffles, we do giveaways, we do auctions. Every little donation that we get can influence our live streams on YouTube and Twitch, whether it means writing something on my forehead that you want written on my forehead with a $25 donation, or if you do a $100 donation, I'll change my green screen background during the live show. It's just a lot of fun, and we raise money for a good cause every year. This is the 5th year we're doing it, and I'm really proud of the work that I put into it, but I'm more impressed with how generous Lions fans can be every year, especially when, times can be tough, and I understand there's not a lot of disposable income, but there's so many good people out there that are willing to lend a hand that it kind of renews my faith in humanity a little bit every year.
It's a great fan base, and this does show that obviously we're going to be a little biased being in that fan base and in that world, but they really are, and you see, like you said, the community coming together, and this is a great cause to do that with. That was one of my surprises this year, Jeremy, was the fact that those options are pretty cheap, like the egg on the head and the writing on the head. Those are pretty cheap to do for your podcast here. I feel like there's going to be a lot of writing on your face for the upcoming podcasts here.
Yeah. I mean, that one, and we want to make sure that the people that might not be able to afford the biggest donations get some fun out of it too. And so, like I said, we know that it's not easy times for people to show off their disposable income and be as generous as maybe they want to be. But we want it to be fun for everybody. So, some of the giveaways we do, there's no entry required. You just kind of have to be there while we're live streaming, while we're talking Lions football and doing all the other shenanigans. But yeah, I mean, we want to make it fun for everybody, and we want it to be silly and funny and wacky. And, the more people that can contribute to do that, the wackier it gets.
There are some great ones on here. I'm looking at the overall donation goals from the 5,000 to the 75,000, and I see that one looming at 75,000 again. I see we put it back on there, but I'm rooting for you guys to obviously get as much as you can, which is why we're promoting it. But I like the Pride of Detroit team does public karaoke of Toto's Africa. I want to see that. I'm hoping to see it happen for the 50,000 donation, and I feel like that would be very good.
Yeah, karaoke has kind of been like an annual, tradition with our Movember thing. One of our first charity events that we ever did was actually an online karaoke thing that we worked with former Lions running backs coach Kyle Kasky. We were raising money for his foundation back then. I like karaoke a lot. I like singing. I'm not very good at it. And then Toto's Africa was kind of just the song that we kind of assumed for the website a few years back. Every time the Lions won, we would blare it during our podcast and things like that. And it's also a very difficult song to sing. So I think it would be particularly embarrassing for myself and a bunch of other PODers that hopefully we could, go to some local Metro Detroit bar and sing our hearts out and maybe get a bunch of Pride of Detroit fans there in the bar too singing with us as well. So yeah, that should be a fun one if we get there.
Now, another Pride of Detroit friend of the show, Ryan Matthews, he's on here a few times. I'm curious about the timing that he's going to do the Dan Campbell caffeine challenge, because is he going to do it with some of the other challenges? Like, are you going to pump him full of the black eyes or whatever they call those that Dan drinks and then have him sing Africa or get on the podcast or something?
That's a good question. We haven't pieced those ones together yet, but that's I'll be honest, that's the one I'm most scared about. It's like 1,400 milligrams of caffeine, and he drinks coffee, which is why he's doing it. I'm not. I don't drink coffee, but like I just want to make sure he's medically okay drinking what a 260-pound tight end, former tight end, is drinking every day at Allen Park. But no, that should be a fun one to see how he reacts, how his body reacts, and yeah, it should be fun to witness, I would imagine.
We had to do some research on this on the show because my co-host, who's off site now and isn't part of this interview, Shane Graham, he does a very similar thing to Dan.
Oh, wow.
And he's got a pretty calm demeanor in general, but he does what I think is called the black eye, not the red eye. I'm used to the red eye, but then there's the black eye. I think that's what Dan Campbell drinks. So I'm curious to, if Ryan's free, then I'll just try to have him on the show at that time when he drinks it, and then see how he does, because he's a frequent guest and always does good stuff. But make sure to tell us where we're going to share the links on our social media, and for the fans' sake here, we're going to be interviewing a different Pride of Detroit analyst every week here. We'll have Ryan Matthews, we'll have Ty Schulter back on, we'll have John Whitaker all throughout the month so that we can continue to promote this. But and we'll be sharing it on our social media here shortly. But tell the people where they can go to both follow your coverage, Jeremy, and then follow along with the process here.
Yeah, just go to prideofdetroit.com to view all my work. And then, a little bit down the page, you'll see the Pride of Detroit logo with a little mustache, and you can click on that link, and it'll give you all the links to donate, all of the prizes that we're going to be giving away all month, all the donation goals this year that include, like you said, some karaoke. We're going to do a pizza eating challenge. I'm going to play video games on stream with Graham Glasgow if we get to a certain level. I'll run a 5K, which is something I've never done and I don't enjoy running. So a bunch of fun stuff like that. You can also, when you donate, you can donate at any time throughout the month of November, but you really get the bang for your buck if you do so during our live streams, which you can watch on youtube.com/Pride of Detroit or twitch.tv/Pride of Detroit. That's when you can see us do kind of silly stuff to ourselves. And it's also a great place to watch our podcast and do silly stuff all the month of November. And then at the very end of the month, we're going to have like a full, usually like a 16-hour stream where we just talk Lions football for 16 straight hours. We bring a bunch of Lions analysts, some national analysts, talk Detroit Lions football, and then it's kind of our last push for that charity drive where it's just like one of those charity marathons that used to be on TV. We're trying to raise as much money as possible in the final moments of the month. So there's a lot of silly stuff we do on those streams as well.
You had a great guest list last year for that and in the previous years. So, be sure to tune into all this stuff throughout the month for Pride of Detroit and for the great campaign that they're doing. Make sure to donate if you're able, because, it's great. I really like the sweatshirt with the mustache. I like that as a touch this year, that for one of the donation levels, you get a Pride of Detroit sweatshirt with the Movember mustache, is that your tattoo, Jeremy?
That is
okay.
What my tattoo looks like as well. Yep. Yeah, and we've never really sold a lot of Pride of Detroit merch in our history, so it's an opportunity to get, if you're a fan of the site, if you're just a fan of the Lions, it's got a big lion on it, it's Lions colors. It's a way to get some kind of exclusive merch.
So if you want a sweatshirt that has a logo of Jeremy Reisman's tattoo, then be sure to donate $500. But seriously, donate to this if you can. It's a great cause, and we'll be having the Pride of Detroit guys on all month to promote it. But we appreciate you kicking it off, Jeremy, and giving great insights as always. And we'll be tracking the campaign and tracking your coverage throughout November and beyond here.
I appreciate it, Ryan. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about it.
Definitely. It's a great cause, and we'll make sure to be promoting it all throughout the month, and we'll follow your coverage, and hopefully we'll have a little better week on the Lions side of things to cover next week here.
Let's hope for it. I appreciate it, man.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy. We'll talk to you later.
All right, bye.
Thanks to Jeremy Reisman. Great stuff there. We're excited to be partnering with them here and promoting this because it's a great cause. And we'll talk to some of the other folks here. I think John Whitaker is on next, so we'll talk to him next week. But for the last segment here, we're going to be talking to Mick of the Purple Persuasion. We didn't get a chance to talk to them last week, and unfortunately, we don't have the Holes in studio. It's past Tate's bedtime. Unfortunately, here he's too big for us now. But we're going to talk to Mick of the Purple Persuasion about the Vikings' last game against the Lions and the outlook of the NFC North for the season here. So stick with us. You're listening to Shane Graham's Extra Points with Ryan Walsh on Jethro FM.